Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Shall we go start in a minute? As many of you know, last week we talked about cause and effect relationship. And last week we talked about especially on rain and the benefits that we get from the causes. And we said that those causes cannot be the real doers of effects. And we gave the example of rain, and we talked about the benefits and especially the arts and adornment in effects. And we said that those causes are not the real effects, because, and we also talked about how they are unconscious and they cannot see, they cannot hear, so they cannot be the real doers of effects. And this week we will talk about humans, because as humans we are conscious, not like other causes. We are conscious beings, and we can hear, we have intellect, we can see, and we have a lot more abilities than other causes. But are we the real doers of our actions? And this is actually a really important point in Islam, and as humanity, this is the question, philosophical question, and this question is really important for us to be the real servant of Allah, because if we say that we are the real doers of our actions, this leads us to arrogance, and arrogance is the biggest obstacle in our servitude to Allah, and this is the biggest obstacle to enter eternal heaven. So if we, inshallah, we will discuss those topics this week. And it's again Risale Nur. We will read from Risale Nur. Risale Nur is a commentary of Quran, and Risale Nur especially talks about the observable evidences from the universe, and it gives us observable evidences, and it makes our belief firm, and it makes us attain certainty in our belief, what we believe in the Quran and as Muslims, and it saves us from the doubts in our belief. And we, again, we will do the mudhakara as a study method. So instead of having one sheikh, one speaker, we have in our method, like we have multiple speakers, and everyone and most people join, and they share their insights. And today we have Professor Colin Turner from UK and Professor Harun Prem, and me, Umar Farooq Ramazan from Connecticut. I will, again, we will talk about, we will read from the 32nd word from the book Words, and we will talk about, even we will give examples from our actions, eating and speaking, and we will talk about whether or not we are the real doers in our actions. So inshallah, I will read for about a minute, and then I will come back, and then I will, and our panelists will talk about those topics, inshallah. And the question here is that it is that everything is tied to a cause. Everything in this universe is tied to a cause. So that means that causes have an actual effect. And if they have an effect, are they not able to be God's partners? As an answer, effects have been tied to causes because divine will and wisdom require them to be so. And so that great numbers of the divine names may be manifested. Everything has been tied to a cause, but we have decisively proved in numerous places, including many of the words, that causes have no actual power with which to create their effects. So for now, we shall say this. Among causes, human beings are self-evidently the most superior and have the greatest power of choice and the most extensive ability to control and direct other causes. And among the most obvious of man's actions over which he exercises choice are eating and the powers of speech, speaking, and thought. Furthermore, all these faculties are extremely well-ordered, wonderful, and purposeful chains. But of the 100 links in these chains, only one is subject to man's power of choice. For example, in the chain of actions concerning food, which stretches from the nourishment of body cells to the forming of fruits, only moving the jaw and chewing the food is subject to man's choice. And in the chain of speech, only exhaling air and blowing it into the mold of articulated letters, and while a word in the mouth is a seed, it becomes like a tree. In the air, it yields the fruits of millions of the same word and enters the ears of listeners along with millions of others. Man's imagination can barely reach these metaphorical truths. So how should the short arm of choice reach it? Since among causes, man is the most superior and has the greatest power of choice, and yet his hands are thus tied from real creation, how should other causes, such as inanimate creatures, animals, the elements, and nature have any real power of disposal over the other causes? Each of those causes is only a container, a cover for the dominical works, a tray bearer for the gifts of the compassionate one. Of course, the receptacle for a king's gift and the handkerchief in which it is wrapped are the individual who brings the gift, which is placed in his hand, can in no way be partners in the king's sovereignty. Anyone who supposes that they are partners in imagining nonsensical absurdities. In the same way, apparent causes and intermediaries can have absolutely no share in God's sustaining of his creatures. Their lot is only to perform a service of worship. So from this paragraph, I will read it again and I will ask my panelists to interpret it. Facts have been tied to causes because divine will and wisdom require them to be so, and so that great numbers of divine names may be manifested. Everything has been tied to a cause, but we have decisively proved in numerous places, including many of the words, that causes have no actual power with which to create their effects. So for now, we shall say this. Yes, Professor Turner. Do you have any comments on this?
On this very first paragraph, you mean?
Yes.
Effects are tied to causes, I think, for two reasons. We are created in time and space. We are limited and finite. And the nature of the limited, finite world is by default, creation, a finite and limited realm in which things are appearing in a regular and measured fashion, not all at once. If you think of the idea of absoluteness, the divine names we know are absolute, and they don't have degrees in them. So they don't appear as they are in a measured and regular form, ultimately as they are. In this realm, they are manifest in a certain way. And that certain way is what we call the causal nexus, with things appearing to operate in a fashion whereby it seems one thing is causing another, and where you have temporal succession, one thing following another. It is the default setting of our world, because it's a world of limitation and finitude. So we see things appearing one after the other as though one is causing the other. That is the only way we can understand anything. Otherwise, it would be absolute chaos. So, I mean, it's only one paragraph, but right from the beginning, it seems that this is what he's trying to tell us. The causal nexus, the causal realm is there for us to understand something. But at the same time, it also carries the possibility of preventing us from reaching the truth. There is an equal likelihood of reaching the truth and not reaching the truth. And that is all tied up with the divine test. So the causes are there in order, the veils are there in order to be cast aside. The causal nexus is a realm of veils, basically. Causes are veils, which are covering the divine names and covering the divine action. They are there to be cast aside, be understood, be transcended. At the same time, they're also, in a sense, a kind of obstacle, because we are under the conditions of an examination and a test, being tested to see which of us can actually transcend this idea of causes and reach the idea of God, basically. So necessity for causes are necessitated by these two things: need for regularity, so that we can understand what's happening, but also needs to be a veil for us to transcend, if that makes sense. I'm not sure whether that's coming across as meaningful.
Two reasons you said them: the need for regularity and to be a veil to manifest God's divine names.
And also to hide God's names, because remember, the test is for us to be able to discover the hidden treasure that is the Creator. And the treasure is hidden behind veils. And causes are maybe the most robust veils which are in existence. Causes have no actual power with which to create their effects, it says in the text. The fact is that causes appear to us very much as though they are creating. And this is part of our test. Our test is to discover the hidden treasure who created us. Creator, God, Allah. The causes are a veil to this. So there are two reasons for causes to exist.
Thank you. As you said, hidden treasures. It's not like God wants to trick us. He's hiding himself, but he's showing his names. He's not directly giving us apple, but by means of trees, sun, water, and all the veils. They are veils, but they are manifesting God's names, and we are discovering His names. It's amazing.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Professor Harun, do you have any comments on this?
Thanks for having me. Just joining here to this intellectual community is amazing. Nothing to add to Ustad Colin. He just mentioned this very clearly, but I think even it would be less if we spent hours and hours on this issue, because this is very critical. So maybe I will be just rewording, maybe I will be giving some different examples from my profession, which could make sense to some of you at least, to just try to dig into the meaning, the same meaning, more and more. What I notice is, in the first place, the start of this treatise, Risale, is again based on a verse from Quran, which is from Surah Al-Rum, 22nd verse. And it is amazing, the translation of the verse is, among its signs is the creation of the heavens and the earth, and the variations in your language and your colors. Verily in that are signs for those who know. Since we read all the passage, you see that we will have examples from language, like eating, like just putting a word. So these are all examples from language because it comes from the verse, since this Risale is a tafsir of this verse. So this is one thing I want to draw attentions, like we are kind of making a tafsir explanation, or one explanation among millions of explanations of this ocean verse, let's say. Starting with that, let's come to the cause and effects relationship. So what I understand, cause and effect relationship is necessary to make sense of our very existence in this apparent realm, Alem-i Shahada. Let's consider, for example, our dreams. In our dreams, we cannot make sense of our existence as robust as we make sense in this realm. When you look at, when I ask myself why I can't make sense of my existence in dreams as robust as my existence in here, real or apparent realm, the answer is in dreams you cannot see, let's say, regular relationships between causes and effects. Usually they're unconnected or disconnected. So this is a nice example for us how it would be if we didn't have cause and effects. My immediate answer to this question is that we would not make sense of our existence in the first place if there were no relationships between cause and effects. So it looks like the Creator, Allah, wants to have these cause and effects for us to make sense of our existence. This is one message that I'm getting from this. Another example could be a disease condition like hallucination. In hallucination, again, somebody loses sense of existence. The reason is that in hallucination, everything is mixed up. Cause and effects are not as regular. So that, you see controversial relations while being in state of hallucination. So these are two clear examples for me to see why cause and effect is working for me to make sense of existence. On the other hand, while making sense of our existence in this apparent realm, as we think and focus deeper on the relationship between cause and effect, we can realize even deeper relationships. All the scientific community, just especially what we call positive sciences, let's say physics, for example, or engineering applications, you just dig into cause and effects more and more, and actually you see more deeper at a minor scale, at a smaller or nano scale. At any scale, nano or even smaller scales, you see this cause and effect relationships. So what does this tell us even further? So at any scale of cause and effect relationship, it's a tongue of disposition. What this tongue of disposition says that we just understand, we verdict upon our incapability of any cause to really show evidence or ownership of power, knowledge, wisdom, or any kind of consciousness. This is one side. At any small scale, as I mentioned, we just confess that there is no evidence of ownership of power, knowledge, wisdom, or consciousness of these causes. Yet, the apparent effects are very effective, meaningful, purposeful, and carry evidence for ultimate will, wisdom, power, and consciousness. So the qualities of all the causes are significantly different than the qualities of the results or the effects. I can keep on, I don't want to just talk too much, but these are the very first initial inspirations that I understand.
Before insights, like especially on dream and hallucination. And as you said, we will now talk about, as you said effects, and you talked about effects and causes having opposing qualities. Inshallah, you can continue from that and elaborate it more. Thank you. I will read this as well, and then we will discover more. Among causes, human beings are self-evidently the most superior and have the greatest power of choice and the most extensive ability to control and direct other causes. And among the most obvious of man's actions over which he exercises choice are eating and the powers of speech, speaking, and thought. Furthermore, all these activities are extremely well-ordered, wonderful, and purposeful chains. But of the 100 links in these chains, only one is subject to man's power of choice. For example, in the chain of actions concerning food, which stretches from the nourishment of the body's cells to the forming of fruit, only moving the jaw and chewing the food is subject to man's choice. So this is the example of eating, and I can ask Professor Turner to explain it more. As human beings, like, we are the most superior of causes, but our most obvious action of eating.
I think it's interesting that Ustad here says that among all causes, human beings are self-evidently most superior and have the greatest power of choice, the most extensive ability to control, direct other causes. It is, I think, in numerous degrees, much easier to talk about non-living beings not owning their own actions. When we talk about human beings and causality, inevitably we come to the idea of, we create our actions or do we not? You know, we know that there are certain involuntary actions such as shivering or sneezing over which we have very little control. There seems to be within, you know, the daily operating of a human being and functioning of a human being, many things which we appear ourselves to be causing, bringing about, bringing into effect. So it's very easy for us to talk about non-living beings not owning their own actions than it is when it comes to talking about human beings not having sovereignty over their actions, because we are connected intimately to those actions which proceed from us. If you think about the two actions which Ustad has highlighted here, and this is another issue that we need to talk about. Why did he choose these two actions? When we think about them, we see that we are taught from childhood that this causal realm, this causal nexus, is a truly efficacious one, and that causes, we as human beings do indeed own our own effects. We really do have agency. This is something which is taken for granted, and it's taught to us from childhood. And we know that in theory we're supposed to attribute everything to the creator, but in the case of human actions, this really is very difficult for us to accept. It's what we call in English the straw that breaks the camel's back. Either we accept it, in which case all will be well and good, or we will reject it. We'll reject the notion that our actions are created by God directly. There's no in-between position, even though we would like there to be. Either God is creating every action that appears to proceed from us, or we are creating them. There's no middle position. And I think this is why Quran tells us that most people do not believe. It says quite clearly, most people do not believe. And of those who do believe, most believe only if they are able to attribute partners to God alongside him. In other words, our intention is not altogether bad. It's not altogether toxic. We want to attribute creation to God, but it is so difficult to admit that we have no power, no wisdom, no knowledge, no beauty, no nothing. It's very difficult. And if you consider the two actions that Ustad is showcasing here, which are speaking and eating, these actions take up a lot of our time. And these are actions that we think are down to us. And yet, if we pick them apart, we find out that very few of them actually come down to human agency. And even those actions which we can identify as being connected with human agency actually don't belong to us when we analyze them. For the very reason that we don't have the requisite knowledge. These actions are actions which need knowledge. They're predicated on knowledge. And we as human beings, however wonderful and fabulous we are, cannot lay claim to the knowledge which is necessary to operate the human brain. And the human brain mediates all of our actions. And it has a central role in everything we do. Yet we don't understand it. How can we claim to have sovereignty over its actions? This is very, very difficult, you know, and this, when it comes down to free will and do we create our own actions or not, this is what Ustad talks about as being a matter of highest belief. This is a matter for, you know, the very, very last post of belief, as it were. This is an issue of belief par excellence. It's very, very difficult to understand, and it's not one that people understand easily. And it's because we're involved. We're involved as actors. Are we really the agents or not?
That's actually the eating is the reason for continuous of our, like, that's why we continue living. Like, we eat, and if we don't eat, we don't, like, we die. So that's a really important part of our life, eating.
Yes,
And,
absolutely.
and as
We
you
are
said,
taking in fuel, aren't we? When we eat, we are taking in fuel. And that fuel is being used by our creator to continue our existence, build our bodies. So it's actually key to our survival. And to think that we don't actually play an active part in that is quite outrageous for most people. This is why there is a big issue over the creation of actions, khalqul af'al, in our theological discourse. It's a very, very difficult subject for people to get to grips with. You know, because we want to own. Why can't we own just a little bit? You know, just a tiny, teeny little degree or two. You know, for example, when I write, can't we say that when I write, God is moving my hand, my pen, and all of the angels are present, then the various mur, which make up those actions. Can I not just appropriate just a tiny little bit of each attribute for myself? Will it hurt God if I do that? No, of course not. He won't mind. It won't affect him if I hold back just a teeny tiny, teensy weensy spot or milligram of agency. You know, like when we're doing the Anna comparison, and I say that just as I build my house, so too does Allah build his palace. Okay, this is good. It's fine. God is much, much, much greater than I am. God is incomparably greater, unthinkably, unfathomably bigger and more powerful in every way. But can I not just keep something for myself out of all this? This is why human beings do not want to embrace this idea that we do not create our own actions.
especially,
That's all I've got to say.
thank you. You know, this the eating is the reason for the continuance of our existence in this world. And I am so amazed how we are so arrogant to Allah and to, you know, worshiping Him and obeying Him, even though we do not even control the action of eating. And in the next paragraph, we see that here the chain of actions concerning food, which stretches from the nourishment of body cells, like we have trillions of cells, to the forming of fruits, I mean, the forming of our organs in our body. That's because the things that we eat, only moving the jaw and chewing the food is subject to man's choice. And other trillions of the parts, the trillions of parts belong to Allah. And that's, I think, puts us in our place. Thank you. So Professor Harun.
Yeah, just Harun is fine, you know. Yeah, amazing meaning. Starting with what Ustad Colin mentioned with respect to Ene, we definitely need a sense of ownership to make sense of anything. This is how it works. Nobody can work, nobody can understand something absolute. So let's say meaning is absolute, while understanding is approaching to absolute. And understanding as approaching to absolute becomes understanding happens by drawing limits. In other words, we can't see, for example, without shadows. So shadows should limit what we need to see. And we can't sense, similarly, without limits. There should be some limits to make sense. And these limits are because of this cause and effect relationships, I would say. If they were all relaxed, we would never make sense of existence again. I'm just emphasizing this because I find it meaningful. Allah wants us to make sense of our existence, and with this existence to understand that actually everything belongs to Him in the end. This is the verdict. So, in other words, if I speak with the language of mathematics that we are exposed to in engineering, I would say meaning is kind of continuous. In mathematics, you make this distinction between continuous and discrete. So meaning is continuous, but understanding emerges by discrete approach or finite approach to continuum. So how do you make sense of continuous approach, such as integration in mathematics? You make use of infinite summation. So summation represents discrete or finite, while integration represents infinite. Maybe too much math, but I'm just getting to the point. So overall, I would say our reasoning requires finite approach. Otherwise, we cannot make reasoning. Our intellect works as a key to unlock relationships carefully, intentionally crafted by the creator of all causes and effects, just to make us understand the creation, our existence, and the universe through the reflections of His beautiful names, Asmaul Husna. This is the critical point. Now, once we set up this, we understand that, this is our reasoning style, but while doing the reasoning, we understand again that any cause is incapable of, let's say, producing any outcome or effects. So in between, there's a beautiful quote by Said Nursi, between the long distance between the causes and effects actually reflect or manifest the beautiful names of Allah. This is a core statement, I would say. Definitely it is, because it needs an explanation. We say, I don't buy it. You say that you take the pill and you have the remedy. So remedy belongs to the pill. I don't buy this. This is very shallow. This is illiterate, and this doesn't satisfy my understanding. So in between, there should be something, actually many things going on. When we ponder, we say it is the manifestation of Asmaul Husna, the name Shafi, who gives remedy, Hakim, Rahman. So all these kind of names are reflecting in between. So Allah, in other words, intends us to ponder on His names, actually, by this cause and effect settings, I would say. And even we see this by many scholars and scientists. Any real scholar or scientist just confess that the more they dig into understanding the real actions in the universe, the further it gets. I mean, everybody confesses this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, you pointed out of cause and effect, and in your first talk, you mentioned how cause and effects are completely different in terms of having qualities. And here in the example of eating and the cause, and we should eat to continue our existence. And the cause here is that we just here I see we move our jaw and we chew the food, and that's only what we do as cause. And the effect is that the nourishment of body cells, right? Trillions of cells are nourished, and the organs in our body are formed. So when you compare, what we do is just we chew the food, and then that's it. But what we have is that the nourishment of trillions of cells. That's something amazing that we cannot own. And here I want to continue with speaking as our second action. And in the chain of speech, only exhaling air and blowing it into the mold of articulated letters. And while a word in the mouth is a seed, it becomes like a tree. In the air, it yields the fruits of millions of the same word and enters the ears of listeners along with millions of others. Man's imagination can barely reach this metaphorical truth. So how should the short arm of choice reach it? And here, I want to ask a question to Professor Turner, and if he has any insights on this, and again, the cause and effect of view in our speech, that we do not even own our speech.
I think that speech is one of the miracles of human creation. Speech has enabled us to actually interact with each other and with the rest of creation in ways which were unthinkable, would be unthinkable if we didn't have it. It's a symbolic language that we need, and how speech is actually produced is completely mind-blowing. And to actually think that we could have any kind of mediation, even any kind of intermediary position in the creation of sounds and in their dissemination into the atmosphere, in their reproduction, in their sort of exponential multiplication throughout throughout the heavens, actually. Because when we speak, our sound is carried on particles, it's carried on forever, never ending, passing from particle to particle. And people who know about acoustics would be able to explain much better than I'm doing. To be able to actually have a mastery over this, you would actually have to have knowledge of every single action that takes place when we articulate letters. You would have to be able to understand how the brain is working when we recognize the words of other people and they register in our own brain in order to be able to reply. Sounds, how are the sounds produced? These are actually unfathomable. And for us to be able to lay claim to any ownership, any sovereignty, or any agency over our own speech would necessitate our having to possess knowledge which is encyclopedic at least. It would transcend an encyclopedia. If you think about, several terabytes of information that needs to be processed in every second that we are thinking about articulating a particular word, how can we claim, when knowledge equals power? Of course, they say knowledge is power, and that's very true. It's said colloquially, but it actually resonates with this issue because knowledge gives us the power to do these things. And if we don't have that knowledge, how can we claim to have the power?
When you said if you don't have the knowledge, you mean the knowledge of the transmitting of air words in the air and its
Absolutely. Absolutely. The knowledge of how sound is articulated in our mouths, the place of articulation of words and letters, and how acoustics works, how the brain works in processing and in receiving information. All of these things, this knowledge is encyclopedic. And if you don't have that knowledge, then how can you claim to be the agent? This is the point, isn't it?
Yeah, amazing.
Agency requires knowledge. If you don't have that knowledge, who has the knowledge? Is it the particles of air? They have this infinite knowledge. Is it my tongue? Does my tongue have this infinite knowledge? My ears have this infinite knowledge? Because this infinite knowledge is necessitated by the process. So someone somewhere must have this knowledge because these things are happening. So is it me? Do I have it? No. The causes have it? Clearly not.
As you said, right in the next paragraph, I want to read this, and it's exactly what you say. Since among causes, man is the most superior and has the greatest power of choice, and yet his hands are thus tied from real creation. How should other causes, such as inanimate creatures, animals, the elements, and nature, have any real power of disposal over other causes?
Mashallah, yes, that's an excellent point. If we can't, and we are the most superior of the creation, how can particles have that knowledge? How can, the particles of air possess that kind of knowledge? It's unthinkable.
So reflection upon ourselves and the outer world, that's how we can get to know our creator, right? Not just ourselves, not just outside, but when we compare our actions with the actions in the creation. Thank you.
I think Ustad Nursi posed two actions which are extremely interesting, because they are actions which preoccupy us for a lot of our time, talking and eating, and they are actions that we don't really think about. And the fact that we don't really think about them should be telling us something. The fact that we can do them without thinking means that someone somewhere has the requisite knowledge to bring about these functions and these operations in these bodily systems, and for them to operate very smoothly and very effectively, without deficit, without error, without confusion, most of the time anyway. These processes run very effectively, very efficiently, and very smoothly. Yet we don't have the knowledge to operate them. And if we don't have it, how can inanimate causes, elements, nature, how can they have any real agency or real power of disposal over other causes? It's just unthinkable, totally unthinkable.
And we have one more paragraph. Professor Harun, if you want, I can read that and you can tie it together.
However you like. I just want to say, yes, these two examples actually, it's in our everyday life, and we are exposed to these activities very much in every day. But also, I believe these examples are given because of the verse again. At the end of the verse, it says variations in your languages. That's the translation. But lisan alsinetikum, your languages. So it's the language, or our tongue, I would say, is kind of source of language, and also it is source of eating. I mean, you just eating by the tongue, and also you just produce words by the tongue. I believe these two examples is also inspiration from the verse. This is what I'm saying.
From the verses you mentioned earlier?
Surah Al-Rum, verse 22. Actually, it is the verse. When you go back in this Risale, you will see the verse at the beginning. It's not here, but you just took a part from this treatise. So the beginning of the treatise is this verse that I mentioned.
But among his signs is the variation in our languages.
Right.
Harun Bey, is it also true that was Surah Al-Rum which gave us the verse for the first time that we looked at this a couple of weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago? Is that right?
I don't remember clearly, but was it the first part of this?
I'm trying to think. I may be confusing it with another circle.
But they're very intermingled. Maybe you are right, but I'm not so sure.
Okay.
But I was amazed. I just looked at the verse at the beginning, so it's a perfect, let's say, interpretation of this verse. I'm amazed by this.
I think he constantly amazes us with his
Right.
with his insights and his perspicacity as a thinker and the way that he ties everything together and he makes everything meaningful. He brings everything together. He makes sense of things, and I think it's true enlightenment when a thinker can do that, make things meaningful, make things clearly stand out, and they are truly enlightened and they truly have enlightenment. That's not some sort of airy fairy attribute. It's a meaningful attribute. It means that they are able to explain, make sense of the world, and this is true scholarship.
Absolutely.
It's also the reflection of prophethood as well. It's what the prophet did, salatu wassalam, when he came. When he was able to read the world in the name of his Rab, and the world began to light, be full of light. The world was flooded with light when he was born. What does that mean? It means that the world became meaningful and it became readable and interpretable. And I think this is what Ustad Nursi does, all the time. And he amazes you, even though you may have read the same passages many, many times. There's always something new, always something novel and fresh to take from it.
Very nice. Yeah.
May Allah increase our amazement, inshallah. Yeah, day by day. And as you said, we should see Allah's, and this paragraph is about that, seeing Allah's actions and seeing that even eating and talking, the things that we do every day for hours and hours, and these are actually gift of Allah. And in this paragraph, we'll talk about that. And these are the gifts of Allah. And we, from the oneness Tawheed point of view, we see that it's action of Allah. And so that causes us to give thanks to Him, inshallah. So I will read this paragraph. And yes, each of those causes is only a container, a cover for the dominical works, a tray bearer for the gifts of the most compassionate one. Of course, the receptacle for a king's gift and the handkerchief in which it is wrapped, or the individual who brings the gift, which is placed in his hand, can in no way be partners in the king's sovereignty. Anyone who supposes that they are partners in imagining nonsensical absurdities, in the same way, apparent causes and intermediaries can have absolutely no share in God's sustaining of His creatures. Their lot is only to perform a service of worship. Professor Turner, any insights on this?
I'm thinking about what Harun said about the tongue, In the verse, it talks about our tongue, our language. The tongue is a piece of flesh. It's a muscle. And if you think these two actions that Ustad Nursi has highlighted, speech and eating, tongue is involved in both of them. And these actions are so different. If you think about eating kebab or you're eating some kind of nice sauce, and the tongue is really involved, in tasting, moving the food around the mouth, and relaying all of these tastes back to the brain. And then 2 hours later, tongue is talking philosophy, making words which are philosophical. Completely different operations, completely different actions. How can the tongue be responsible for two actions which are so different? Completely different. How can we attribute any causal agency, any knowledge, this muscle, which is doing all of these very, very different and diverse things? It's unthinkable. The tongue is there as a means, that's all. So it's an apparent cause, an apparent intermediary. It can have no share in God's sustaining of His creatures. Tongue can have no share in eating. It can have no share in speaking. We can acknowledge its presence in those actions. We can acknowledge it as a kind of container or as a tray bearer for the gifts of the compassionate one, can acknowledge it as a cover for the dominical works, as Nursi says. We cannot attribute creation to it. That's all.
Thank you. I actually didn't realize that, eating and speech, as if they are different things, but they are done with only one of our limbs. It's very interesting.
It's amazing, amazing.
And now, I give thanks for, having tongue. And today, inshallah, we realized that, how valuable a gift it is.
MashaAllah, yes.
And also we have one question, actually, this question from the last week, and our listeners can ask a question anytime through the chat. So we have a question. It's an
and also they can contribute, I'm sure listeners have some nice inspirations as well, so they can just jump in right into chat, talk.
And maybe they can raise hands. So Professor Harun, I will ask a question, and we have about 5 minutes left. The question is, can we draw a clear border between the merciful divine hand on the one hand and the human destructive hand on the other hand?
Ustad Colin, I want to just push the ball to you.
Professor Turner, you
I
can
think
answer.
I've spoken enough.
This question was from last week, I believe.
It was from last week, and I think I sent the answers to the WhatsApp group. I think I said it's a difficult border to draw because when we see something that is destructive, and I think I gave the example of setting fire to a building, someone lighting a match and setting fire to a building, the falling of the building, the crumbling of the building is a result of God's direct creative act. It's an act that has been precipitated by that person with his intention or her intention to destroy the building. So negative, evil intention. So we see that the hands that are involved are both human and divine. Divine hand, of course, is solely from the point of view of creation of the act. The human hand is from the point of view of the intention behind that act. It's the only thing I could think of. So it's a difficult border to draw because you have to draw a line between human intention and divine creation. And also divine will, of course, because not everything that we intend actually will then come into being. It depends on divine will. It's not an easy issue to answer.
I think it also touches upon the topic of evil, I guess, when you give the example of burning the house. It's something evil done by humans, but the action is created by God. Can I ask, related to this topic, for example, when we talked about the causes are veils and they are placed there to show different names of God, and also we talked about in the beginning of the series, the causes are placed to protect God's dignity, so the criticism will not go to God. So, and we said, God is the creator of every action, even death. So can I ask a question about, for example, someone killing the other person? So who is the doer and why? Professor Harun, do you want to talk about this?
As Ustad Colin mentions, this is also deep topic. It takes, I think, long time to ponder. Of course, maybe who asked the question last week, if he's here, maybe he can just elaborate what he really wants to get into. Otherwise, with these things, yes, I think one part is related with what we do as bad actions. Allah allows them happen because, again, this world, this realm is cause and effect realm, and that means that anything you do should have a reflection, or anything you don't do will have bad reflections. So any, let's say, out of control things will end up having side effects or bad consequences, evil consequences. It has to be, otherwise this world by definition would not be a place for examination. Everything would be appearance, but the creation does not, I mean, we understand from the creation, as we discussed so far, right? We understand that Allah wants to be known, let's say, through causes and effects, and evil acts are jumping in as well. So, but the nice thing is, I would say, with our intention, or with our not having these evil things on us intentionally, we are always saved from it. You know, intention is the start of everything. So whatever you do, even if it has bad sequences, if you didn't intend to do it, then it is not counted as evil for you. So intention is, let's say, a miracle bottle for us, which is going to turn everything evil to non-evil for ourselves. But in reality, evil exists because this world is an examination world. And we know anything, any goodness is created, anything is created by Allah, and creation itself ontologically is beautiful and purposeful.
Thank you for your last comment. And as we talked about that in the first session, since everything is created by God and everything shows the names of God, and we say Asma al-Husna, that's beautiful names of God, like the beautiful names. So the things evil, as you said, the evil exists, the apparent evil exists, but since this is the creation of Allah and it shows the beautiful names of God, it is beautiful in its essence. But since we do not see the beauty in it, we only see the evil. So God places veils, even humans, to protect His dignity, and we see only humans as the doors. But still, God's names are manifested there.
Yeah, a clear example would be Satan, for example. Satan is created. Satan is pure evil. There is no goodness. But creation of Satan is good. If Satan is not created, then we cannot struggle and we cannot increase our capacities, you know?
Yeah, that's beautiful examples. You know, we are talking about humans, but every human has goodness in itself, in himself. But as you said, devil is complete evil, 100%, but still, as Marshall, thank you for
creation of it is not evil, yes.
Yeah, creation is not evil. Thank you very much. And I thank you, Professor Harun and Professor Conrad. It was a beautiful discussion. And we will continue our webinars, inshallah, every Sunday. Thank you for joining. I hope to see you next week, inshallah.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank